Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. In the early 1980s, two women were murdered in Ada, Oklahoma. In the case of one of those murders, two innocent men have since been exonerated through the use of DNA evidence. In the other, two men still sit in prison, even though there's enough evidence to suggest they shouldn't. In America, upwards of 90,000 wrongly convicted people sit behind bars. The new Netflix true crime documentary, The Innocent Man, explores this story in Ada, Oklahoma, to reveal just how potentially innocent people end up locked up. Let's take a look.
You're giving this statement of your own free will.
Did she beg y'all not to hurt her?
She was hollering for help and telling us to stop. I thought it was just a dream. Just a dream.
If I wrote The Innocent Man as a novel, folks probably wouldn't believe it. In small towns like Ada, the prosecutors and the police were under enormous pressure to solve two sensational murders.
Debbie Carter and Denise Haraway. Debbie's body was lying naked on the floor. She had a cord wrapped around her neck. People started calling in about Ron Williamson
And Dennis Fritz.
The town was in disbelief.
And then 2 years later, Denise Haraway disappeared.
The police charged Tommy Ward and Carl Fontenot.
She goes, Tommy, I didn't think you'd ever do anything like this.
Once the confession tapes were played, these people were guilty.
If it wasn't true, you wouldn't say it.
This is like a damn game, man.
What's that?
I don't know why they keep wanting me. They know I didn't do this.
I believe the evidence. These boys did it. My daughter's gone.
He had the knife in his hand like this, and he was stabbed.
I believe that these are completely coerced. Something was really rotten at the core of this case.
Blood sample is never obtained. Fingerprints are never obtained.
What are the police trying to cover up, and who's going to get to the bottom of this?
How close did you come to being executed?
5 days.
The fact that your life can be taken away that easy is horrifying.
We just don't expect the police to play dirty. It's all about winning. And along the way, if the truth gets blurred,
There was no evidence of stab wounds.
or twisted,
Everything about their confession has been proven wrong.
that's too bad.
I believe the men who are in jail are not the men who did it.
They're a replacement for the real people.
This is going to happen again. Don't think otherwise.
Everybody, please welcome Barry Scheck. How you doing, Barry? Great. Thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on this this amazing series. You are the director of the Innocence Project. Co-director, excuse me. And you have been such for a number of years. The Innocence Project has been in existence for 26, 27 years. In the last 4 years, we have seen this kind of explosion of true crime entertainment. Did you and the folks at the Innocence Project possibly see that as a means to tell very publicly some of the stories that you've been dealing with, that you've been working on for so many years?
Well, right now, there's more than over 300 post-conviction DNA exonerations. And when you look at the registry of exonerations, which our colleagues at from Michigan and the University of California at Irvine compile, there's over 2,500 cases where new evidence of innocence has had convictions vacated and then charges dismissed. So there are so many cases, and we're still looking. This wave has really started. We mark it from 1989, when DNA first became part of the criminal justice system. We were able to have a tool to prove so many people innocent. So, we started doing this. We have a network which includes, I think, 56 organizations within the United States and something like 12 abroad. So as all these exonerations occur, there have been innumerable stories, movies, feature films like Conviction, Hilary Swank did that along with one of our
Peter
board.
Gallagher played a version of you.
I actually had
More handsome in person, I have to tell you.
Yeah, and Tony Goldwyn, most important of all, directed it, who's been an indispensable partner. He's on the board of the Innocence Project, as is John Grisham.
John Grisham, this book I think came out, was it 2007, 2006, excuse me? How did you get, well, let's actually go even further back. How did you get involved in this particular case?
Oh, my gosh. Well, I think the documentary indicates that we got involved after, frankly, some really terrific lawyers were able to get Ron Williamson's conviction reversed and, frankly, his execution stayed. He came within 5 days of execution. And then it became clear that somebody should do DNA testing on a lot of the remaining evidence, including hairs that had been used to convict both Dennis Fritz and Ron Williamson, and semen evidence. So we got hooked up with a lawyer in Oklahoma, Mark Barrett, a good friend, eventually pulled in some other people. So we worked on exonerating Dennis and Ron. And, the DNA not only proved that they weren't there and didn't do it, but identified the person who really committed the crime. That's how we got involved in the case. John's story is fascinating because when Ron Williamson died, the co-author of a book that Peter Neufeld and I, the co-founder of the Innocence Project, wrote called Actual Innocence, which is still in print and published in 2000. We called Jim, who knew Ron very well, and he wrote an obituary of Ron in the New York Times. And it was about this guy who was going to be the next Mickey Mantle out of Oklahoma, who was a really good baseball player, who suffered from mental illness, and then wound up getting wrongfully convicted and almost executed. And Jim is just, he's won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. He's such a great writer. He writes this obituary, and the great John Grisham reads it and says, "This is everything that interests me. A small town, the law, criminal justice, and a wrongful conviction."
And it's his only nonfiction book, I believe.
Boy, right? Is it ever. And so John got involved after we worked on the civil case with Cheryl Pilot and Mark Barrett as depicted in the movie. What I'm really glad this documentary covers is that, as you'll see during the course of it, there was a prior case involving these same officers that was subject of a great book called The Dreams of Ada. Because what used to happen is all of a sudden you'd have these confessions that were coerced confessions where people would start telling, I had a dream. That Ron Williamson's statement had a dream. There was a lot during this period where that was a technique of interrogators. So Ward and Fontenoy were also victims of this, and they are subject of this documentary, which we really want to see them exonerated.
When we talk about coerced confessions, there's a number of things that are putting strain on the justice system right now, and I think a lot of them have come to light recently. Do you think coerced confessions are a symptom of a greater problem when it comes to the justice system, or can be boiled down to bad apples?
Oh, God, no, it's not bad apples. I think it's very well proven now. We have new science looking at interrogations. There's ways that police were essentially taught to do interrogations where, if they got a hunch and they suddenly became convinced that this is the person, they would do what's known as a guilt presumptive interrogation. And unfortunately, in many instances, this involved not just psychologically coercing people by giving them, threatening them, having a good cop and a bad cop, giving the person who's in that room alone, some what they call minimization. Oh, if you say this, don't worry, it'll go easy on you. It must have been an accident. You must have been high on drugs. It must have been any of a number of things. And they will begin through their questioning to suggest facts that they believe are true, and in many instances turns out from objective forensic evidence they're false. And that happens in these cases that are depicted in The Innocent Man and lots of other cases. So you go back to, let's say, 1989 in the city of New York. What about the Central Park Five, right? A perfect example of it. And there are many others from this period moving forward. In Chicago, they literally had a detective that was torturing people, Burge. So there have been so many of these wrongful convictions based on false confessions. And the problem with it is that many of them were by police officers that were intentionally coercing people, feeding them facts, knowing that they were probably crossing lines, and then many police officers that were just taught these techniques. And now what we're trying to do across the United States, and we've got many jurisdictions doing this, is getting statutes that require the videotaping of an interrogation from Miranda warnings forward. And we just got that here in the state of New York, but it's not enough just to get that taping done. What you really want to do is begin to train officers in better ways of questioning people to make sure that mistakes are not made. And, we learn this a lot, frankly, from high-value detainees. Torture is not that efficient or reliable, and there are other ways of interrogating people that, whether they're guilty or innocent, you get to the truth faster. In the United Kingdom, they have what they call a peace method for doing interrogations. Here we have something in the United States, some people are working what's called Higgs method, but there are different methods of doing interrogations that are not psychologically coercive. And with these young men, the people that are the easiest victims of all are teenagers and people like Ron Williamson that have mental problems.
People who live in poverty often as well, who don't don't have the means to defend themselves.
Well, it goes without saying, in the criminal justice system in the United States, class, money, and race, those are the key factors. And so, of course, any problems with police tactics and methods are going to be visited on people of color and poor people more than they will be on people of means, but can happen to them too.
So talk to me about the two men who are still behind bars right now.
Well, they have actions pending. Unfortunately, there was no DNA testing that could be done in their cases. And so by the end of this movie, I think you'll be convinced that their convictions are unreliable. It's been a very rocky road in terms of post-convictions. Our friend Mark Barrett has an application pending in the Pontotoc courts, that's the local Ada district court right now, and is still looking through evidence that has just been discovered from that office. And our friends at the Center on Wrongful Convictions in Chicago, with whom we've done a lot of cases, are working on Fortenau's case, which is now in the federal courts on federal habeas appeal. But what we're kind of hopeful is going to happen here is that as this documentary goes to air and people see it, all of a sudden people will become aware of this case. And what sometimes happens is with this kind of publicity is that witnesses emerge that you haven't heard from in literally decades.
Is there also more pressure than put on the state at times? We find sometimes in cases of exoneration or attempts to exonerate, the state is very reluctant to exonerate convictions because of the bad publicity or the fact that the formerly guilty party can then sue the state.
Well, I don't think that too many people should be worried about lawsuits, because if you're wrongly convicted, that's a terrible thing. You can't give people enough money to make up for a wrongful conviction.
I think of the West Memphis 3 and having to take the Alford Plea.
Oh, that was horrible.
Yeah, but that was simply so that
we helped on that because that was horrible. But that I think that's unconscionable. And there's even ABA rules that talk about how you shouldn't be offering people pleas. And just so everybody knows, an Alford plea is where you say, I know the state has enough evidence to bring me to trial and potentially convict me, but I am innocent. Nonetheless, I will enter into a plea of guilty while saying I'm innocent in order to get out of prison and end this nightmare and not run the risk of, getting the death penalty or other severe punishment. That I find that to the extent it happens in many cases, it's been very troubling. But, I do believe that prosecutors are beginning to change on this. First of all, be careful who you vote for prosecutor. Across this country now, there's a movement to elect people as prosecutors who are progressive, who believe that we have to do something about mass incarceration, about coerced confessions, about eyewitness era, about junk forensic science, about releasing people on getting rid of cash bail in most instances, or at least having a fair bail system, and real discovery of what information the state has, revealing information about police officers that is very often kept secret in states across the country of bad acts they've done, even what we call adjudicated bad acts. That's when Internal Affairs finds that a prosecutor has done, finds that a police officer has lied or committed an act of misconduct. Unfortunately, the defense doesn't get to see those all the time or as quickly as they should. Not even prosecutors, unfortunately, under the laws of many states, get to see it. So there's a big problem.
Kind of a dumb question. I sort of know the answer to it, but for the purpose of this conversation, what is the pushback? What is the general selling point, or not selling point, but soundbite that is the pushback for progressive movements like that?
You mean who opposes them?
Yeah, and why?
Well, I don't really think there's a good soundbite to oppose. I mean, I think that all the rhetoric of law and order and you're being soft on crime, I mean, we have a coalition now of the left and the right. There's a group in Texas called Right on Crime. As we sit here today, there is an editorial in the New York Times talking about let's make criminal justice reform in New York as good as it is in Texas. And the Innocence Project has had, and the Innocence Project of Texas, we have had so many big exonerations in the state of Texas. Now we have discovery reform in the state of Texas. We started the first really great conviction integrity unit in Dallas in the state of Texas. It continues to this day. That's where innocence organizations and defense lawyers work jointly with prosecutors to re-examine potentially wrongful convictions and let people go. And then try to learn from those miscarriages of justice to fix the system. And now we have at least 26 of these conviction integrity units across the country. And so we have district attorneys, people running for office who were formerly defense attorneys. Take, for example, the famous Michael Brown case in St. Louis County, right? Wes Bell has just been elected there. He beat Robert McCulloch. He's a wonderful young man who is focused on all the right issues. And Kim Gardner is the district attorney in St. Louis City now, and she's a legislator who, again, is dedicated to changing the system, attacking mass incarceration, making it a fair process. So district attorneys have a lot of power, and if you will elect a progressive DA, that's great, but that's not good enough. One of the things that was involved in Ron's case, and certainly Dennis Fritz's as well, and the other two that you'll see depicted, Ron certainly had a woefully ineffective lawyer. And